"You stupid, stammering fool! Do you know who I am?" The slap landed so hard that Neka's head snapped sideways, and her 4-year-old daughter Zainab screamed from the seat beside her. The entire train carriage, packed with traders, students, families, and business travelers on the long journey from Kano to Lagos, fell into shocked silence. Blood trickled from Neka's split lip as she clutched the armrest, her other hand instinctively reaching for Zainab to calm the terrified child. Her cheek burned where his heavy gold ring had cut into her skin. Welcome to Wa, Stories by Tino. Thank you so much for your unwavering support. Before we dive into this powerful journey, please drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from: USA, Jamaica, Nigeria, UK, or anywhere else in the world. We love hearing from you. Now, let's begin this unforgettable story. 30 minutes earlier, the train had pulled out of Kano station at exactly 6 a.m., beginning its 30-hour journey to Lagos. Neka had boarded early, securing 2 seats in the economy class carriage, one for herself and one for little Zainab. Everything she owned was packed into 2 worn suitcases tucked under their seats. She was 29 years old, a widow, and she was running toward a new life in Lagos, where her late husband's brother had promised her a job as a house help. It wasn't much, but it was better than the suffocating poverty and judgment she faced in Kano after her husband died 2 years ago from a motorcycle accident. Neka had a secret she carried like a stone in her chest. She stammered. Not always, but when she was nervous, afraid, or confronted, the words got stuck in her throat like broken glass. As a child, other children had mocked her. As an adult, employers rejected her. Her late husband had been the only person who never made her feel ashamed of it. "Mommy, I'm hungry," Zainab whispered, tugging at her mother's faded blue wrapper. "Soon, my love," Neka replied softly, reaching into her bag for the small package of chin-chin she had bought at the station. We'll eat something when the train stops." The carriage was crowded but relatively peaceful. Traders discussed business. A group of university students laughed at something on their phones. An elderly woman across the aisle was already snoring softly, her head wrapped in a colorful jewel. Then he boarded at the last minute. Chief Danladi Musa was impossible to miss. He was a large man, over 6 feet tall, heavily built, with a round face, thick neck, and small eyes that seemed to calculate everyone's worth at a glance. He wore an expensive white agbada with gold embroidery, a red fila cap, and multiple gold rings on his fingers that caught the morning light. 2 younger men followed behind him carrying his luggage, designer bags that probably cost more than everything Neka owned combined. "Move!" one of his assistants barked at a young man sitting in a window seat. "Chief needs this seat." The young man quickly gathered his things and relocated. Chief Danladi settled into the seat with a grunt, spreading his legs wide, taking up more space than necessary. His assistant sat across the aisle, ready to attend to his every need. Neka tried to make herself smaller, turning toward the window with Zainab, hoping to be invisible. She had learned long ago that powerful men like Chief Danladi were best avoided. The train rolled through the outskirts of Kano, leaving the ancient city behind. Dust and heat shimmered outside the windows as they passed through small villages, farmland, and scattered settlements. Everything was fine until Zainab's chin-chin bag slipped from her small hands and scattered across the floor, some pieces rolling toward Chief Danladi's polished leather shoes. "I'm sorry," Neka said quickly, leaning down to gather the scattered snacks. So sorry, sir." Chief Danladi looked down at the chin-chin near his feet with disgust. "Control your child," he snapped. "This is not a playground." Yes, sir. Sorry, sir." Neka's stammer got worse when she was nervous, and this man radiated the kind of power that made her throat close up. "What's wrong with you?" Chief Danladi asked, his voice dripping with contempt. "Why are you talking like that? Are you deaf and dumb?" Heat rushed to Neka's face. Several passengers turned to look. No, sir. Just what? Spit it out." "I stammer sometimes, sir. I'm sorry." "Stammering fool. he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, then turned away dismissively. Neka's hands trembled as she finished picking up the chin-chin. Zainab looked up at her mother with wide, confused eyes. "Mummy, why is that man mean?" "Shh," Neka whispered, pulling her daughter close. Don't talk now." She thought that was the end of it. She hoped he would ignore them for the rest of the journey. But 30 minutes later, as the train approached Zaria, Chief Danladi's phone rang loudly. He answered it, speaking in Hausa about some business deal, his voice booming through the carriage with no consideration for other passengers. When he finished the call, he turned to one of his assistants. "Bring me water, cold water." The assistant pulled out a bottle of water from a small cooler bag. As he handed it to Chief Danladi, his elbow accidentally knocked against Neka's shoulder, causing her to jolt forward. "Watch where you're sitting," the assistant snapped at Neka, as if it were her fault. Sorry, Neka said automatically, even though she had done nothing wrong. Sorry, Chief Danladi mocked in a cruel, exaggerated stammer. "Is that the only word you know? Sorry?" He laughed, and his assistants laughed with him. Neka felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not cry in front of this man. She would not give him that satisfaction. "Mummy?" Zainab tugged at her sleeve, sensing her mother's distress. "I'm fine, baby," Neka whispered, though her voice shook. But Chief Danladi wasn't finished. He turned fully in his seat to face her, his small eyes glittering with malice. "People like you should not be allowed on public transport. You contaminate the air with your stupidity, can't even speak properly. What kind of example are you setting for that child?" Something inside Neka snapped. She had endured mockery her entire life, from classmates, from employers, from strangers. But she would not let this man insult her in front of her daughter. She turned to face him, her voice quiet but firm, fighting through the stammer. "I paid for my ticket, sir. I have every right to be here, and I'm not stupid. I have a speech impediment, which is a medical condition. It doesn't make me less human." The carriage went silent. Several passengers stopped their conversations to watch. Chief Danladi's face darkened with rage. How dare this stammering woman talk back to him? He stood up, towering over her seat. "What did you just say to me?" Neka's courage faltered, but she held his gaze. "I said I have a right to be—" That's when he slapped her. The sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. Neka's head whipped to the side, and she felt the warm trickle of blood from where his ring cut her cheek. Zainab screamed, and several women in the carriage gasped in shock. "That's what happens when people like you forget their place," Chief Danladi said coldly, flexing his hand as if the slap had hurt his fingers. Neka sat frozen, her hand touching her bleeding cheek, her ears ringing. Around her, passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. A few pulled out their phones. Whether to record or to pretend they hadn't seen, she couldn't tell. One middle-aged woman in the row behind leaned forward. "Chief, that was too much. She's just a woman with a child." "Mind your business," one of Chief Danladi's assistants barked. "Do you know who you're talking to? This is Chief Danladi Musa, special advisor to the governor of Kano State. Show some respect." The woman fell silent, and the carriage returned to its uncomfortable quiet. Chief Danladi sat back down, satisfied that he had reasserted his authority. His assistants handed him a handkerchief to wipe his hand, as if touching Neka had somehow dirtied him. Neka pulled Zainab into her arms, the little girl sobbing into her chest. She felt the eyes of the other passengers on her, pity, discomfort, but no one willing to help. But as she sat there, blood on her cheek and shame burning in her chest, something else began to grow inside her. It started small, like a spark in dry grass. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind. The cold, calculating kind. She had spent her entire life apologizing for existing, for stammering, for taking up space. And this man, this cruel, powerful man, had just humiliated her in front of her daughter and an entire carriage of people who did nothing. But Neka had a secret that Chief Danladi Musa didn't know. She wasn't just a stammering widow running to Lagos to work as a house help. She was running away from Kano because she had seen something 3 weeks ago. Something that could destroy Chief Danladi Musa's entire life. And now, trapped on this train for the next 29 hours with the man who had just assaulted her, Nneka made a decision. She would make him pay. Not with violence, not with shouting, but with the truth. What would you do if someone humiliated you in front of your child and everyone just watched? Drop a like if you believe Nneka deserves justice, and comment where you're watching from. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story is about to take a twist no one will see coming. What secret does Nneka know about Chief Danladi? The train pulled into Zaria station at 8:47 a.m., and passengers shuffled off to stretch their legs, buy food from platform vendors, or use the restroom facilities. The stop would last 20 minutes before continuing south toward Kaduna. Nneka didn't move from her seat. She sat perfectly still, one arm wrapped protectively around Zainab, the other hand pressed against her swollen cheek, where Chief Danladi's ring had split the skin. The bleeding had stopped, but the pain throbbed with each heartbeat. Chief Danladi and his assistants had disembarked to buy food, laughing loudly as they walked down the platform like nothing had happened, like slapping a woman in front of her child was just another Tuesday morning for him. "Mummy, does it hurt?" Zainab asked softly, her small fingers touching her mother's injured face with heartbreaking gentleness. "A little," Nneka admitted, forcing a smile. "But Mummy is strong. We're both strong, remember?" The elderly woman from the row behind leaned forward, her weathered face creased with concern. "Sister, I have pain medicine if you need it, and some ointment for that cut." Thank you, Ma," Nneka said quietly, accepting the small tube of antiseptic cream the woman offered. "That chief is a wicked man," the woman continued, keeping her voice low. "But he's powerful, very powerful. His family controls half the construction contracts in Kano State. People say he has connections all the way to Abuja." She paused meaningfully. "Be careful, my daughter. Men like him can make people disappear." Nneka nodded, saying nothing. But inside, that cold spark of anger burned brighter. Men like him can make people disappear. Yes, she knew that better than anyone. 3 weeks ago, Nneka had still been living in the cramped one-room apartment in Sabongari, Kano that she shared with Zainab. She survived by doing laundry for wealthy families in the neighborhood, earning barely enough to feed her daughter and pay rent. One of her regular clients was Hajia Ramatu, the second wife of a wealthy textile merchant. Hajia Ramatu lived in a sprawling compound in the upscale Nasarawa area, and Nneka came every Tuesday and Friday to wash clothes by hand in the outdoor washing area behind the main house. On that particular Tuesday evening, Nneka had stayed late because Hajia Ramatu had extra loads. The family was hosting guests for a wedding celebration. Nneka worked quietly in the back courtyard as the sun set, scrubbing expensive lace and brocade fabrics, careful not to damage anything. That's when she heard raised voices coming from the boys' quarters, separate rooms where drivers and security guards stayed. At first she tried to ignore it. It wasn't her business. But then she heard something that made her blood run cold. A young girl's voice, pleading, crying. Please let me go. I want to go home. I want my mother." And then a man's voice, harsh and commanding. "Shut up. You'll do exactly what you're told. You think anyone cares about a village girl like you? You're nobody. You belong to us now." Nneka's hands froze in the soapy water. She recognized that voice. Moving carefully, silently, she crept closer to the boys' quarters, staying in the shadows. Through a gap in the curtained window, she could see inside. 3 men stood in the small room. One was the compound's head security guard. Another was a man she didn't recognize, wearing expensive clothing and holding a leather briefcase. The third man was Chief Danladi Musa. She knew him because he occasionally visited Hajia Ramatu's husband for business meetings. And on the bed, huddled against the wall, was a girl who couldn't have been more than 14 years old. She wore a simple village dress, her eyes red from crying, her wrists marked with rope burns. "This is the last one from the Zamfara village," the unfamiliar man said, gesturing to the briefcase. 500,000 naira, as agreed. She's healthy, no family to look for her, and she's been prepared. Chief Danladi opened the briefcase, counted the money quickly, and nodded with satisfaction. "Good. The buyer in Lagos is expecting 3 girls by Friday. This one makes the 3rd. Transport them separately. Different trains, different times. Less attention that way." Nneka's heart pounded so loudly she was sure they would hear it. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. They were trafficking girls. Young girls from villages, selling them like cattle to buyers in Lagos. "What about the Kano girl we picked up last week?" the security guard asked. "She's been giving us trouble." "Then discipline her," Chief Danladi said coldly. "Or get rid of her. I don't care which. Just make sure she's quiet before transport." The girl on the bed whimpered, and Chief Danladi turned to her with a smile that made Nneka's skin crawl. "You're lucky, little one. The man who bought you is very rich. You'll live in a big house. All you have to do is obey." "I want my mother," the girl sobbed. "Your mother sold you to us for 20,000 naira, the unfamiliar man said flatly. "She's probably spent it already. You have no mother anymore." Nneka backed away slowly, her legs shaking, bile rising in her throat. She had to get out of there before they saw her, before they realized someone had witnessed their transaction. She returned to the washing area, finished her work with trembling hands, collected her pay from Hajia Ramatu, and left the compound as quickly as possible without drawing attention. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing that girl's terrified face, kept hearing her crying for her mother. Nneka wanted to go to the police, but she knew how the world worked. Chief Danladi had connections, power, money. Who would believe a stammering widow with no evidence against a special advisor to the governor? And if she tried to report him and failed, he would find out. He would make her disappear, just like those girls. So she made a different decision. She would take Zainab and run to Lagos, far away from Kano, far away from Chief Danladi and his evil business. She would start over, keep her head down, and try to forget what she had seen. She had booked the cheapest train ticket she could find, packed their few belongings, and prepared to leave everything behind. She never imagined that Chief Danladi Musa would be on the same train. Now, sitting in the Zaria station with her face still throbbing from his slap, Nneka realized that fate had given her an opportunity. Chief Danladi didn't know she had witnessed his trafficking operation. He saw her as nothing, a stammering nobody beneath his notice. But she knew his secret, and somehow before this train reached Lagos in 28 hours, she was going to use it. The question was how. She pulled out her old Nokia phone, she couldn't afford a smartphone, and stared at it. Who could she call? Who would believe her? Who had the power to stop a man like Chief Danladi? Then she remembered something her late husband used to say. "Nneka, you're quiet, but you're not stupid. You see things other people miss. That's your strength." She looked around the carriage carefully. Among the passengers, there had to be someone who could help. Someone with influence, with connections, with the ability to expose Chief Danladi. Her eyes landed on a well-dressed woman in her 40s, sitting 3 rows ahead. The woman wore expensive Ankara fabric and carried herself with quiet confidence. She had been on her laptop since the train departed, typing furiously, occasionally taking phone calls in a professional, authoritative voice. Earlier, Nneka had overheard part of one conversation. "Yes, I need that report by tonight. The minister is expecting a full briefing on the trafficking investigation before the Senate hearing on Thursday." Trafficking investigation. Nneka's heart began to race. Could this woman be involved in investigating trafficking? Could she be someone who would actually listen? But how could Nneka approach her? What would she say? The woman was clearly important, busy, probably annoyed by interruptions, and Nneka was just a stammering widow with no proof, no credibility. Before she could decide, the train whistle blew, signaling passengers to reboard. Chief Danladi and his assistants climbed back into the carriage, carrying bags of suya, bottled drinks, and fresh bread. Chief Danladi settled back into his seat, completely ignoring Nneka's existence as if he hadn't assaulted her just an hour ago. The train lurched forward, continuing its journey south toward Kaduna. Nneka made a decision. She would wait until they reached Kaduna, the next major stop, about 3 hours away. She would watch, listen, and plan. And if the opportunity presented itself, she would find a way to speak to that woman. But as the train picked up speed, leaving Zaria behind, Chief Danladi's phone rang again. He answered it, speaking in Hausa, not bothering to lower his voice. Yes, the shipment is on schedule. 3 girls. As promised, they'll arrive separately over the next 2 days. No problems. Everything is under control. Nneka's blood ran cold. He was talking about it, right here, right now, in front of everyone. He was so confident in his power, so certain of his untouchability, that he didn't even bother to hide. And then he said something that made her hands clench into fists. The youngest is only 13, fresh from Zamfara village. The client will be very pleased. 13 years old, the same age Nneka had been when her father died, leaving her vulnerable and alone. That cold anger inside her transformed into something fiercer, something unbreakable. She would not run. She would not hide. She would not let this man continue destroying lives. She caught the eye of the well-dressed woman 3 rows ahead. The woman was staring at Chief Danladi with a strange expression. Not fear, not disgust exactly, but intense focus. Like she was memorizing every word he said. Their eyes met for just a second, and Nneka saw something flicker in the woman's gaze. Recognition? Understanding? Then the woman looked away, returning to her laptop, but her fingers moved across the keyboard with renewed urgency. The train rolled on toward Kaduna, carrying secrets, lies, and the promise of justice. Chief Danladi has no idea what's coming for him. What do you think Nneka should do? Should she risk everything to expose him or protect herself and her daughter? Comment below and don't forget to like and subscribe. Coming chapter is going to change everything. You won't want to miss what happens when the train reaches Kaduna. The train was an hour outside Kaduna when everything exploded. Chief Danladi had just finished his 3rd phone call about the shipment when the well-dressed woman 3 rows ahead stood up, smoothed her expensive Ankara skirt, and walked directly toward him. Nneka watched, her heart hammering, as the woman stopped right beside Chief Danladi's seat. She was tall, imposing, with sharp, intelligent eyes, and the kind of presence that commanded attention without raising her voice. "Excuse me," the woman said politely. "Chief Danladi Musa, correct?" Chief Danladi looked up, clearly annoyed by the interruption, but his expression shifted when he took in the woman's expensive clothing and confident bearing. This was someone who mattered. "Yes," he said cautiously. "And you are?" The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "My name is Mrs. Ifeoma Okonkwo. I'm the director of the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons." She pulled out an official ID badge and held it up for him to see. "Nap tip. I believe you've heard of us?" The carriage went completely silent. Every passenger stopped what they were doing to watch. Chief Danladi's face drained of color. I don't understand. What is this about?" "Oh, I think you understand perfectly," Mrs. Okonkwo replied, her voice still pleasant but with steel underneath. "You've been making some very interesting phone calls for the past hour. Very careless phone calls, I might add. Did you really think you could discuss human trafficking operations on a public train without anyone noticing?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Chief Danladi blustered, but his voice shook. "This is harassment. Do you know who I am? I'm a special advisor to the governor of Kano State. Yes, I know exactly who you are." Mrs. Okonkwo's smile disappeared, which is why it's particularly disappointing that you thought you were above the law. She pulled out her phone and pressed a button. Immediately, 2 large men in plain clothes who had been sitting at the far end of the carriage stood up and moved toward them. They wore nap-tip badges on their belts. "These are my officers," Mrs. Okonkwo explained. "We've been tracking your trafficking ring for 6 months, Chief Danladi. We knew you were transporting girls from northern villages to buyers in Lagos. We just needed proof. And then by pure luck, you decided to board this train and make phone calls discussing the exact details of your operation. You even mentioned the 13-year-old girl from Zamfara. Chief Danladi's eyes went wild, darting around the carriage like a trapped animal. His assistants had both gone pale and silent, frozen in their seats. "You're lying!" Chief Danladi shouted. "You have nothing! Those phone calls mean nothing without context." "Actually," Mrs. Okonkwo interrupted, holding up a small recording device, "we have everything. Every word you said has been recorded with proper authorization. We've been waiting for you to incriminate yourself, and you did exactly that." She turned to address the entire carriage, her voice carrying clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to your journey. This man is under investigation for human trafficking, the buying and selling of young girls, some as young as 12 years old. If anyone in this carriage has information about his activities, please come forward now. Your testimony could save lives." The carriage erupted in shocked murmurs and gasps. People pulled out their phones, some recording, others frantically texting. And then, to everyone's surprise, Nneka stood up. Her legs shook. Her hands trembled, but she stood. I have information," Nneka said quietly, and then louder, fighting through her stammer with every ounce of courage she possessed. "I saw something 3 weeks ago." All eyes turned to her, the stammering woman with the swollen, bog-cut face and the frightened child clutching her wrapper. Mrs. Okonkwo's expression softened slightly. "What's your name?" Nneka. Nneka Okafor." "And what did you see, Nneka?" Nneka took a deep breath. She looked at Chief Danladi, whose face had gone from pale to red with rage. His eyes promised murder, but she had come too far to stop now. "I work as a laundry woman in Kano. 3 weeks ago, I was working late at a compound in Nasarawa. I heard voices from the boys' quarters. I looked through the window and saw him." She pointed directly at Chief Danladi. "With 2 other men. They had a young girl, maybe 14 years old. She was crying, begging to go home." "This is nonsense," Chief Danladi roared, jumping to his feet. "She's making it up. She's a lying, stammering fool who wants attention." "Sit down," one of the NAPTIP officers commanded, placing a heavy hand on Chief Danladi's shoulder and forcing him back into his seat. Mrs. Okonkwo gestured for Nneka to continue. "Go on." He opened a briefcase full of money, 500,000 naira. The other man said she was the last one from Zamfara village. They talked about transporting the 3 girls to Lagos, selling them to buyers. Nneka's voice grew stronger, her stammer easing slightly as the truth poured out. The girl had rope burns on her wrists. She was terrified, and he told them to discipline another girl who was giving them trouble, or get rid of her. The carriage was absolutely silent, except for Zainab's soft crying and the rumble of the train tracks. Mrs. Okonkwo's eyes were intense. "Can you identify the location of this compound?" Yes, it belongs to Alhaji Mahmoud, the textile merchant. His second wife, Hajia Ramatu, is my key client. I can take you there. I can show you exactly where it happened." Mrs. Okonkwo turned to her officers. "Contact our Kano office immediately. I want that compound raided within the hour. If there are girls there, I want them found and rescued." One officer immediately stepped away, speaking urgently into his phone. Chief Danladi lunged at Nneka with a roar of rage, but the second NAPTIP officer caught him, slamming him back into his seat with professional efficiency. "You stupid bitch!" Chief Danladi screamed at Nneka, all pretense of dignity gone. "Do you know what you've done? I'll destroy you. I'll destroy your family. I'll make sure you and that bastard child of yours—" The officer's hand covered Chief Danladi's mouth. "One more word and I'll gag you." Mrs. Okonkwo pulled out handcuffs. "Chief Danladi Musa, You are under arrest for suspected involvement in human trafficking, conspiracy, and assault." She glanced at Neka's injured face. "I assume he's responsible for that?" "He slapped me," Neka said, "about an hour ago, because I stammered when I apologized for my daughter dropping food near his feet." "Did anyone else witness this assault?" Mrs. Okonkwo asked, looking around the carriage. Slowly, reluctantly, several passengers raised their hands. The elderly woman behind Neka spoke up firmly. "I saw everything. He hit her so hard his ring cut her face, and he mocked her for stammering. It was cruel and unprovoked." A young student pulled out his phone. "I recorded part of it. I was going to post it online, but I was scared because everyone said he was powerful." "Send that video to me immediately," Mrs. Okonkwo instructed, handing him a business card. As the NAPTIP officers handcuffed Chief Danladi and his 2 terrified assistants, Mrs. Okonkwo approached Neka and spoke quietly. "What you did took incredible courage. Most people would have stayed silent out of fear. You probably saved multiple lives today." Neka's eyes filled with tears. "I was so scared. I almost didn't say anything." "But you did. That's what matters." Mrs. Okonkwo paused. "Where are you traveling to?" "Lagos. I was going to work as a H-house help. It's all I could find." Mrs. Okonkwo studied her thoughtfully. "Can you read and write?" Yes. I finished secondary school before my father died." "Neka, I'm going to give you my card. When we reach Lagos, I want you to come to our office. We need your full testimony, yes, but I also want to talk to you about a job. We desperately need people who understand what these girls go through, people who have courage and integrity. The pay isn't amazing, but it's stable work, and it comes with housing assistance." Neka stared at the business card in her trembling hands, unable to believe what she was hearing. "And that stammer?" Mrs. Okonkwo added gently. "We have a speech therapist who volunteers with our organization. If you want help with it, we can arrange that too. But honestly, you spoke more clearly just now, telling the truth, than most people do when they're lying." The train continued toward Kaduna with Chief Danladi Musa in handcuffs, sitting between 2 officers, his expensive agbada rumpled, his gold rings confiscated as evidence, his face a mask of impotent rage. Mrs. Okonkwo made phone call after phone call, coordinating with offices in Kano, Kaduna, and Lagos. Within 30 minutes, news came through. The Kano office had raided the compound. They found 2 girls locked in the boys' quarters, both under 16, both from rural villages, both with the same rope burn marks Neka had described. Alhaji Mahmood, the compound owner, and his head of security were also arrested. When the train pulled into Kaduna station at 12:15 p.m., police were waiting on the platform. Chief Danladi and his assistants were transferred to local custody, and Mrs. Okonkwo assured Neka that he would be transported to Abuja for federal prosecution. "His political connections won't save him," she told Neka, as they watched him being led away in handcuffs, cameras flashing, as journalists who had been tipped off captured every moment. "Not when we have recorded confessions, eyewitness testimony, and rescued victims. He's finished." As the train prepared to depart Kaduna, continuing south toward Minna, the atmosphere in the carriage had completely changed. Passengers who had looked away when Chief Danladi slapped Neka now smiled at her, offered her food, asked if she needed anything. The elderly woman moved to sit beside her, becoming an unofficial grandmother to little Zainab. And Neka sat quietly, holding Mrs. Okonkwo's business card, thinking about the 13-year-old girl from Zamfara who would now be rescued instead of sold. She thought about the job offer, the speech therapy, the housing assistance. She thought about how, just this morning, she had been running away from her past with nothing but fear and 2 suitcases, and now she was traveling toward a future she had never imagined possible. All because she had found the courage to speak, even with a stammer, even with a cut on her face, even when her voice shook with fear. The truth didn't stutter. Justice served. But this story isn't over yet. Neka's transformation has only just begun. What do you think will happen when they reach Lagos? Like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Next chapter will show you what real revenge looks like when a voiceless woman finds her power. By the time the train departed Kaduna Station at 1:00 p.m., Neka's life had already changed in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. The young student who had recorded Chief Danladi slapping her had uploaded the video to Twitter with the caption, "Special Advisor to Kano Governor beats single mother on train for stammering. This is Nigeria." Within 2 hours, it had 50,000 views. Within 4 hours, it was trending nationwide. #Justice for Neka. Chief Danladi exposed. Stop human trafficking. Multiple news outlets picked up the story. By the time the train was halfway to Minna, CNN Africa had contacted Mrs. Okonkwo for an interview. The BBC was requesting comment from the Kano state government. Social media was on fire. But Neka knew none of this yet. She sat quietly with Zainab sleeping against her shoulder, exhausted from the emotional chaos of the morning. The elderly woman, who had introduced herself as Mama Ejiro, had given Zainab a piece of chin-chin and a sweet drink, which had finally calmed the frightened child. Mrs. Okonkwo returned from making phone calls and sat down across from Neka. "Neka, I need to prepare you for something," she said gently. "Your story is everywhere. The video of Chief Danladi assaulting you has gone viral. News stations are calling. People are calling you a hero." Neka's eyes widened. "A hero? I'm not a hero. I just told the truth." "That's exactly what makes you a hero," Mrs. Okonkwo replied. "In a country where powerful men get away with everything, you stood up and spoke. Even when you were afraid, even when your voice shook, that matters more than you know." She pulled out her tablet and showed Neka the screen. There were hundreds of comments. "This woman is braver than most men I know. Her stammer doesn't make her weak. It makes her voice even more powerful. Every woman who has ever been silenced sees herself in Neka." Chief Danladi thought he could humiliate her. Instead, she destroyed him. Tears streamed down Neka's face as she read the words. For her entire life, people had mocked her stammer, dismissed her, made her feel less than human. And now, thousands of strangers were calling her brave. "There's something else," Mrs. Okonkwo said carefully. "Several organizations have reached out wanting to help you. A women's rights foundation wants to pay for Zainab's education, all the way through university. A speech therapy clinic in Lagos has offered free treatment. And," she paused, smiling slightly, "3 different law firms have offered pro bono representation if you want to sue Chief Danladi for assault." Neka couldn't speak. She could only cry. Mama Ejiro patted her hand. "You see, my daughter, God sees everything. That wicked man thought he was powerful, but he was just dust. And you thought you were nothing, but you were a seed waiting to grow." The train pulled into Minna Station at 4:30 p.m. They had 12 hours remaining until Lagos. During the stop, something unexpected happened. A group of about 20 women, traders, mothers, students, gathered on the platform holding handmade signs. "We stand with Neka. Stammering doesn't mean silent. Every woman's voice matters." When Neka stepped off the train to stretch her legs, the women began clapping. Then they started singing, a traditional Yoruba song about women's strength and resilience. Neka stood frozen, overwhelmed, as these strangers celebrated her. Some women approached to hug her, to thank her, to tell her their own stories of abuse and silencing. One young woman, maybe 19, grabbed Neka's hands and spoke urgently. "My sister was taken 2 years ago. Just disappeared from our village in Sokoto. We never found her. But because of you, maybe other families won't suffer like we did. Thank you. Thank you." Mrs. Okonkwo stood back, watching with a knowing smile. This was the power of one woman's courage. It multiplied, spreading like wildfire, giving others permission to speak their own truths. A journalist from AIT pushed through the crowd with a cameraman. "Neka, can we have a moment? Nigeria wants to hear your story." Neka panicked, stepping back. "I can't. Don't know what to say." "Just tell them the truth," Mrs. Okonkwo encouraged quietly. "The same way you told me." The camera light came on. The journalist, a professional woman in her 30s, spoke gently. "Neka, you've become a symbol of courage for women across Nigeria. What would you say to other women who are afraid to speak up against powerful men?" Neka looked at the camera, at all the women watching, at little Zainab peeking from behind her mother's wrapper. She thought about that 13-year-old girl crying for her mother. She thought about all the women who had suffered in silence, and she spoke. "I was afraid my whole life, afraid people would mock me for stammering, afraid I wasn't good enough, afraid powerful people could destroy me." She paused, steadying her breath. "But today, I learned something. The truth is more powerful than any man. When you speak truth, even if your voice shakes, even if you stammer, even if you're afraid, it can change everything." She looked directly into the camera, her voice growing stronger. "To every woman watching, you are not weak. You are not stupid. You are not nothing. Your voice matters. And if a stammering widow like me can bring down a powerful man with just the truth, then you can too. Don't be silent. Speak. Even if your voice shakes, speak anyway." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Women were crying, hugging each other, holding up their phones to record the moment. The journalist wiped tears from her own eyes. "Thank you, Neka. Nigeria needed to hear that." Back on the train, as they departed Minna and headed toward the final leg of the journey to Lagos, Mrs. Okonkwo received an urgent phone call. Her expression grew serious as she listened. When she hung up, she turned to Neka. "That was the Kano office. The 2 girls we rescued from the compound are talking now. They've identified 3 other locations where girls are being held. We're conducting simultaneous raids tonight." She paused. "They also confirmed something else. Chief Danladi's operation has been running for over 3 years. They estimate at least 40 girls have been trafficked through his network." 40 girls. Neka felt sick. "And no one stopped him? No one saw?" "People saw," Mrs. Okonkwo said quietly. "But they were afraid. Or they benefited from silence. Or they convinced themselves it wasn't their problem." She looked at Neka intently. "That's why what you did matters so much. You broke the silence. And now, because of you, his entire network is crumbling." A NAPTIP officer approached with new information. "Ma'am, we just got word from Abuja. The Attorney General wants this case fast-tracked. They're treating it as a priority prosecution because of the public attention. Also, the governor of Kano has issued a statement condemning Chief Danladi and suspending him from all government positions pending investigation." Mrs. Okonkwo nodded with satisfaction. "When the spotlight gets bright enough, even powerful people start running for cover." As darkness fell and the train continued south, Neka sat by the window watching the landscape change from the dry northern savanna to the greener middle belt regions. Zainab slept peacefully in her lap. Her phone, her simple old Nokia, had been ringing constantly with calls from numbers she didn't recognize. News stations, organizations, people wanting interviews. Mrs. Okonkwo had given her a new smartphone, already programmed with important contacts. "You'll need it," she had explained. "Your life is about to change dramatically, Neka. Are you ready for that?" Was she ready? Neka didn't know. This morning she had been running away to Lagos to work as a house help, invisible and forgotten. Now she was being called a hero, offered jobs, given opportunities she had never dreamed possible. But more than any of that, she thought about the 40 girls. 40 lives destroyed because everyone chose silence over courage. One woman had asked her at the Minna stop, "Weren't you afraid he would kill you for speaking up?" Yes, she had been terrified, but she had spoken anyway. And that, Neka was beginning to understand, was the difference between surviving and living. Around 9 p.m., as most passengers dozed and the train rumbled through the night toward Ibadan, the second-to-last stop before Lagos, Mrs. Okonkwo received one final call. She listened, her expression growing somber, then relieved. When she hung up, she woke Nneka gently. "I wanted you to know immediately. They found her." "Found who?" Nneka asked groggily. "The 13-year-old girl from Zamfara, the one you saw in the compound 3 weeks ago. She was being held in a house in Kano, waiting to be transported to Lagos tomorrow. Because you spoke up today, because the raids happened tonight, she was rescued." Mrs. Okonkwo showed Nneka a photo on her phone. A young girl with frightened eyes, wrapped in a blanket, being carried out of a building by NAPTIP officers. "She's safe now," Mrs. Okonkwo continued. "We're reuniting her with her family. She'll get counseling, medical care, and education support. She has a future now, because of you." Nneka stared at the photo, tears streaming silently down her face. One girl, just one girl, who would grow up, who would live, who would have chances and choices and a life. All the fear, all the pain, all the stammering words that had felt so inadequate, it had been worth it. "Thank you for telling me," Nneka whispered. As the train pushed through the darkness toward Ibadan, carrying a stammering widow who had found her voice and a human trafficker who had lost everything, Nneka held her sleeping daughter close and made a silent promise. She would never be silent again, not about injustice, not about abuse, not about anything that mattered. Her voice might shake, her words might stumble, but they would be heard. And that was a kind of power Chief Danladi Musa had never understood and could never take away. The train whistle blew, announcing their approach to Ibadan station. 6 more hours until Lagos. 6 more hours until Nneka's new life truly began. The train pulled into Ibadan station at 3:47 a.m., and even at that ungodly hour, there was a crowd waiting. Nneka woke to the sound of people chanting her name. "Nneka! Nneka! Nneka!" She rubbed her eyes, confused, and looked out the window. At least 50 people stood on the platform holding candles, phones with flashlight apps, and handmade signs. Women mostly, but also men, students, even some children with their parents. The voice that wouldn't be silenced. "Nneka, our sister, our hero. Stammering is not weakness. One woman can change Nigeria." What is this? Nneka whispered, her heart pounding. Mrs. Okonkwo, who had barely slept, smiled wearily. "This is what happens when people see themselves in your story. You've become more than just a woman on a train, Nneka. You've become a symbol." Security personnel from the Nigerian Railway Corporation formed a protective corridor as Nneka stepped off the train with Zainab in her arms. The crowd surged forward, not threateningly, but with desperate eagerness to touch her hand, to speak to her, to thank her. "My daughter was trafficked 5 years ago," one woman cried out. "Thank you for speaking. Thank you." "I stammer too," a young man shouted. "You made me proud of my voice for the first time in my life." "You're braver than any man in government," another person yelled. Nneka felt overwhelmed, tears streaming down her face, unable to process the love and gratitude pouring toward her from complete strangers. Mrs. Okonkwo and her officers guided her through the crowd and back onto the train before the situation became unmanageable. As the train departed Ibadan for the final 4-hour stretch to Lagos, Nneka sat in stunned silence. "I don't understand," she finally said. "I just told the truth, that's all. Why is everyone acting like I did something incredible?" Mama Ejiro, still awake despite the late hour, answered, "Because, my daughter, telling the truth in Nigeria is incredible. Most people see evil and look away. They see injustice and stay silent. They see powerful people destroying lives and they think, it's not my business. You did something different. You chose courage over comfort. That's rare. That's precious." Mrs. Okonkwo added, And you did it while stammering, while bleeding, while holding your frightened child. You did it when you had every reason to stay silent. That's why people love you, Neka. Because you're proof that ordinary people, people who society dismisses, have the power to bring down giants. At 7:52 a.m., the train finally pulled into Lagos Terminus Station at Ebute Metta, ending the 30-hour journey from Kano. If Ibadan had been overwhelming, Lagos was absolutely chaotic. Hundreds of people packed the station. News vans from every major Nigerian media outlet lined the street outside. Police struggled to maintain order as crowds pushed forward, everyone wanting to see the woman who had taken down Chief Danladi Musa. A representative from the Lagos state government was there to officially welcome Neka. The Commissioner for Women Affairs and Poverty Alleviation, a distinguished woman in traditional attire, embraced Neka in front of the cameras. On behalf of Lagos State, the Commissioner announced, "We want to assure Neka and her daughter that you are safe here. We are providing temporary accommodation, and we are committed to supporting you as you rebuild your life." More cameras flashed, more questions were shouted, more people pushed forward. Zainab began crying, frightened by the noise and chaos. Neka clutched her daughter tightly, feeling like she was drowning in attention, unable to breathe. Mrs. Okonkwo stepped in front of the cameras with practiced authority. "That's enough for now. Neka and her daughter have been traveling for 30 hours. They need rest. There will be time for interviews and statements later. Right now, they need peace." Her officers created a protective barrier, and they escorted Neka to a waiting vehicle, a government SUV with tinted windows and police escort. As they drove through the chaotic early-morning Lagos traffic toward Victoria Island, where Mrs. Okonkwo's nap-tip office was located, Neka stared out the window at the massive city she had only heard about but never seen. Lagos was overwhelming. Millions of people, endless traffic, towering buildings, grinding poverty next to shocking wealth, noise and color and chaos everywhere. "It's so big," Neka whispered. "It's the city of dreams," Mrs. Okonkwo replied, "and nightmares. But mostly, it's the city of survival. If you can make it here, Neka, you can make it anywhere in Nigeria." The nap-tip office was located in a secure compound in Victoria Island. Neka was given a private room with a bathroom, a comfortable bed, and, luxury of luxuries, air conditioning. Zainab fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the journey. But before Neka could rest, Mrs. Okonkwo needed her formal statement. They sat in a conference room with a stenographer, a video camera, and 2 other nap-tip officials. And for 2 hours, Neka recounted everything she had witnessed at the compound in Kano. Every detail mattered: the description of the men, the words they used, the briefcase of money, the rope burns on the girls' wrists, the discussion of disciplining girls who caused trouble. By the time she finished, Neka's voice was hoarse and her face was wet with tears. "You did beautifully," Mrs. Okonkwo assured her. "This testimony, combined with the recorded phone calls, the rescued girls' statements, and the physical evidence from the raids, gives us an airtight case. Chief Danladi will spend the rest of his life in prison." "And the other men?" Neka asked. "The ones who worked with him? We've arrested 17 people so far. The network was bigger than we thought. Drivers, recruiters, safe house operators, even some corrupt police officers who looked the other way. But it's crumbling. Once one piece falls, they all start falling." There was a knock on the door, and a young nap-tip officer entered with a tablet. "Ma'am, you need to see this." Mrs. Okonkwo took the tablet, watched something, and her expression shifted from curious to deeply satisfied. She turned the screen toward Neka. It was a news broadcast from NTA. The headline read, "Governor of Kano State addresses Danladi trafficking scandal." The governor, a stern-looking man in traditional attire, spoke directly to the camera. "I want to assure all Nigerians that Chief Danladi Musa does not represent the values of Kano State or my administration. He has been permanently removed from all government positions. His assets are being frozen pending investigation, and we are cooperating fully with federal authorities. I want to personally commend the brave woman Nneka Okafor, who had the courage to expose this evil. She is a hero, and Kano State is ashamed that we did not protect her and other women from this monster." The broadcast cut to another clip, this one from the Senate chambers in Abuja. A senator was addressing the House. "This case demonstrates the urgent need for stronger anti-trafficking legislation. I am proposing the Nneka's Law, mandatory minimum sentences for human trafficking, protection for whistleblowers, and increased funding for NAPTIP operations." Nneka stared at the screen in disbelief. They're naming a law after me? "They're naming a law after courage," Mrs. Okonkwo corrected. "Your courage, and it will save countless lives." That afternoon, after Nneka had finally slept for a few hours, Mrs. Okonkwo took her to meet someone special. They drove to a rehabilitation center run by NAPTIP in Surulere, a facility where rescued trafficking victims receive counseling, medical care, and skills training. In a bright, cheerful common room, Nneka met her, the 13-year-old girl from Zamfara. She was small, thin, with eyes that had seen too much, but she was alive. She wore clean clothes, her hair had been braided, and she was eating a meal, simple rice and stew, but she ate it like it was the most precious thing in the world. When she saw Nneka, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition? Gratitude? Hope? Mrs. Okonkwo introduced them. "This is Hawa. Hawa, this is Nneka, the woman who saved you." Hawa stood up slowly, and without warning, she threw her arms around Nneka and began to cry. Not the desperate, terrified crying of a girl being trafficked, but the relieved, grateful crying of someone who had been pulled back from the edge of hell. "Thank you," Hawa whispered in Hausa, which one of the counselors translated. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for not looking away." Nneka held the girl tightly, both of them crying, and in that moment, every frightening second of the past 30 hours was worth it. "You're going to be okay," Nneka promised. "You're going to have a life, a real life, with choices and freedom and joy. Because of you," Hawa said simply. Later, after they left the rehabilitation center, Mrs. Okonkwo turned to Nneka with a serious expression. "I meant what I said on the train. I want to offer you a job, not as a house help, as a NAPTIP field officer. You'll work with rescued victims, help them navigate the system, be a voice for women who feel voiceless. It pays 65,000 naira a month, plus housing allowance, and we'll arrange speech therapy if you want it." Nneka's hands trembled. 65,000 naira a month was more than she had ever earned in her life, more than she had ever dreamed possible. "You'll need training, of course," Mrs. Okonkwo continued, "but you have something we can't teach: lived experience, empathy, and courage. Those are worth more than any certificate." "Yes," Nneka whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll do it. I'll help other wee women. I'll be their voice when they can't speak." Mrs. Okonkwo smiled and squeezed her hand. "Welcome to NAPTIP, Officer Okafor." That evening, Nneka sat on the balcony of the small apartment NAPTIP had arranged for her, a modest but clean 2-bedroom flat in Yaba. Zainab played with a new doll that one of the NAPTIP staff had bought for her. Nneka stared out at the Lagos skyline, the endless sprawl of lights, the chaos, the possibility. This city that she had once feared now felt like home. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She opened it cautiously. It was a photo. A group of women standing together, holding a banner that read, "Nneka's courage inspired us to leave our abusers. Thank you." Then another message, and another. Women from across Nigeria sharing their stories, thanking her, telling her that her courage had given them permission to speak, to leave, to fight back. Nneka had boarded that train in Kano as a nobody, a stammering widow with nothing but fear and 2 suitcases. She arrived in Lagos as somebody, a woman with a voice, a purpose, and the power to change lives. And as the sun set over Lagos, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Neka made a promise to herself, to Hawa, to all the women whose voices had been stolen. She would never stop speaking. She would never stop fighting. She would never let another girl be silenced. Her voice might stammer, but it would be heard. And that was the most powerful revenge of all. Neka's journey from victim to hero is almost complete, but next chapter will reveal what happens when Chief Danladi faces justice in court. Don't miss it. Like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. What would you do if you witnessed a crime but were afraid to speak? Your answer might save a life. 3 months after that historic train journey, Federal High Court 7 in Abuja was packed to capacity. Outside, hundreds of protesters filled the street, mostly women, but also men, students, civil society groups, and even some traditional leaders. They held signs, sang songs, and chanted one name over and over: "Justice for Neka, justice for the girls, lock him up." Inside the courtroom, Neka sat in the witness gallery, wearing a simple but dignified blue Ankara dress that Mrs. Okonkwo had helped her choose. Her hair was styled in neat cornrows, and for the first time in her life, she wore light makeup, not to hide anything, but because she wanted to look strong, to look like someone worth listening to. Beside her sat Mama Ejiro, who had traveled from her home in Delta State specifically to support Neka. On her other side was Hawa Saab, the 13-year-old girl from Zamfara, now 14 and slowly healing. Hawa's presence at the trial was voluntary. She wanted to see the man who had tried to sell her face justice. Behind them, the gallery was filled with other rescued victims, NAPTIP officers, journalists, women's rights activists, and curious citizens who had lined up since 4:00 a.m. to get a seat. This was the trial of the decade, and everyone wanted to witness it. At the defense table sat Chief Danladi Musa, looking diminished. Gone was the expensive agbada, the gold rings, the arrogant sneer. He wore a simple gray suit provided by his lawyers, and his face was gaunt, aged by 3 months in Kuji prison while awaiting trial. His hands were cuffed, and 2 prison officers flanked him. His legal team was formidable: 3 senior advocates of Nigeria, the best money could buy. They had filed motion after motion trying to delay the trial, trying to get the case thrown out on technicalities, trying to suppress evidence. But the Attorney General had made this case a priority, and the presiding judge, Justice Nwankwo, was known for being incorruptible. At the prosecution table sat the federal prosecutors, along with Mrs. Okonkwo as the lead NAPTEP representative. They had mountains of evidence: recorded phone calls, witness testimonies, financial records showing suspicious money transfers, testimonies from rescued girls, and most damning of all, Neka's eyewitness account. Justice Nwankwo, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, banged her gavel. "This court is now in session. We are here for the matter of Federal Republic of Nigeria versus Danladi Musa and 17 co-defendants on charges including human trafficking, conspiracy, assault, and corruption." The lead prosecutor, a brilliant woman named Barrister Adeyemi, stood. "Your Honor, the prosecution is ready to present its case." "Proceed," Justice Nwankwo commanded. The first week of the trial focused on establishing the trafficking network. The prosecution called NAPTIP officers who had conducted the raids, presenting photographs of the compounds where girls had been held, the ropes used to restrain them, the ledgers documenting transactions. They presented financial evidence showing that Chief Danladi had made 17 deposits of exactly 500,000 naira each over the past 3 years, each one corresponding to a reported missing girl from northern villages. They played the recorded phone calls from the train, Chief Danladi's voice clear and unmistakable. 3 girls, as promised. They'll arrive separately over the next 2 days. The youngest is only 13, fresh from Zamfara village. The client will be very pleased. The courtroom gasped when they heard it, even though the recording had been all over the news for months. Hearing it played in court, with Chief Danladi sitting right there, made it real in a way that news clips couldn't capture. Chief Danladi's lawyers objected. claiming the recording was obtained illegally, that Mrs. Okonkwo didn't have proper authorization to record on the train. But Justice Nwankwo reviewed the documentation and ruled the evidence admissible. Mrs. Okonkwo had been on official nap-tip duty, tracking a suspected trafficking operation, and had proper authorization from her superiors. The defense had no response to that. Next, the prosecution called the rescued girls to testify. One by one, 5 young women took the stand: the 2 girls rescued from the Kano compound and 3 others who had been found in Lagos safe houses. The youngest was 12, the oldest was 16. Each girl told the same story with minor variations. They had been recruited from poor villages with promises of jobs in the city: housekeeping, selling goods in markets, helping in restaurants. Their families had been paid small amounts of money, 10,000, 20,000 naira, which seemed like fortunes to people living in extreme poverty. But when the girls arrived in Kano, they were locked in rooms, their phones confiscated, their movements restricted. They were told they now belonged to the organization and would be sent to Lagos to work off their debt. When they tried to resist, they were beaten. When they cried for their mothers, they were starved. One girl, barely 13, testified through tears. They said I was nothing, that no one would look for me, that I should be grateful someone wanted to buy me. She looked directly at Chief Danladi. That man came to the room where they kept us. He checked our teeth like we were goats at the market. He said I was worth less because I was too thin. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of people crying. Even some of the court officers wiped tears from their eyes. Chief Danladi sat stone-faced, refusing to make eye contact with any of the girls. His lawyers tried to discredit the testimonies, suggesting the girls were confused, had been coached by nap-tip, or were lying for attention. But under cross-examination, each girl remained consistent in their accounts, providing details only someone who had lived through the horror could know. Justice Nwankwo looked disgusted with the defense's tactics. "Counsel, these are children. Show some respect, or I will hold you in contempt." The lawyers backed down. On the 8th day of the trial, it was Neka's turn to testify. She had been dreading this moment for 3 months. Mrs. Okonkwo had helped her prepare, walking her through what questions would be asked, how to stay calm under cross-examination, how to handle the defense lawyer's attempts to rattle her. But despite all the preparation, Neka's hands trembled as she walked to the witness stand. The courtroom seemed impossibly large, and every eye was on her. The galleries were packed. Cameras from news stations captured every moment, allowed because of the trial's national importance. And there at the defense table, Chief Danladi finally looked at her. His eyes promised murder. Neka placed her hand on the Bible and took the oath, her voice shaking but clear. "I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God." Barrister Adeyemi approached with a kind smile. "Please state your name for the record." Neka Okafor." "Ms. Okafor, I know this is difficult, but please tell the court about what you witnessed on the evening of September 14th at a compound in Nasarawa, Kano." Neka took a deep breath and began. At first her stammer was pronounced, the words catching in her throat. But as she told the story, as she described hearing the girl crying, looking through the window, seeing Chief Danladi with the briefcase of money, her voice grew steadier. She described every detail she could remember: the girl's rope-burned wrists, the transaction of 500,000 naira, the discussion of transporting 3 girls to Lagos, Chief Danladi's cold instructions to discipline or get rid of girls who cause trouble. "And you're certain the defendant was present during this transaction?" Barrister Adeyemi asked. Yes, absolutely certain. I had seen him before at that compound for business meetings. I recognized his face, his voice, his expensive clothing." "What happened after you witnessed this?" "I was terrified. I finished my work quickly and left. I knew if they discovered I had seen them, they would kill me." "Why didn't you go to the police?" Neka looked directly at the judge. "But because he was powerful, a government advisor. I was nobody. a stammering widow. Who would believe me? And if I tried to report him and failed, he would find out. He would make me disappear, just like those girls. So what did you do? I decided to run, to take my daughter and go to Lagos, far away from Kano. I thought if I ran far enough, I could forget what I saw and keep my daughter safe. But you couldn't forget, could you? No, Nneka said softly. Every night I saw that girl's face, her tears, her rope burns. I couldn't forget. Barrister Adeyemi let that sit for a moment, then continued. Now, please tell the court what happened on the train from Kano to Lagos. Nneka recounted the entire journey, how Chief Danladi had boarded at the last minute, how Zainab had accidentally scattered chin near his seat, how he had mocked her stammer, and finally, how he had slapped her so hard his ring cut her face. And what gave you the courage to speak up when Mrs. Okonkwo revealed herself as a NAPTIP officer? Nneka's eyes filled with tears. I thought about that 13-year-old girl from Zamfara, the one I saw in the sea compound. I thought about how she was going to be sold, and no one would save her. And I realized that if I stayed silent, I was just as guilty as the people who took her. She looked at Chief Danladi for the first time since taking the stand. I was afraid of him, but I was more afraid of staying silent, of letting more girls suffer. So I spoke, even though my voice shook, even though I stammered, even though I thought he might kill me. I spoke anyway. The courtroom erupted in applause, and Justice Nwankwo had to bang her gavel repeatedly to restore order. Then came the cross-examination. Chief Danladi's lead defense lawyer, a renowned SAN named Barrister Okonkwo, no relation to Mrs. Okonkwo, approached Nneka with the confident swagger of someone who had destroyed many witnesses before. Ms. Okafor, you say you witnessed this alleged transaction 3 weeks before the train incident. Why didn't you take photographs? I didn't have a smartphone, just an old Nokia, and I was afraid if they saw me with a PH phone, they would know I was spying. How convenient. So we only have your word for what allegedly happened? No. You have the girls who were rescued. You have the financial records. You have his phone calls on the train. You have everything. Barrister Okonkwo smiled coldly. Ms. Okafor, isn't it true that you have a history of mental instability? Objection! Barrister Adeyemi jumped to her feet. Counsel is making baseless accusations with no evidence. Sustained, Justice Nwankwo ruled. Counsel, do you have documentation of any mental health diagnosis? No, Your Honor, but the witness has a speech impediment, which could indicate a stammer is not a mental illness. Justice Nwankwo's voice was sharp. It's a speech condition that affects millions of people worldwide, including highly intelligent, accomplished individuals. If you don't have actual evidence, move on. Barrister Okonkwo, rattled by the judge's rebuke, shifted tactics. Ms. Okafor, isn't it true that you're being paid by NAPTIP to testify? I work for NAPTIP now, yes, but I'm not being paid to testify. I'm testifying because I told the truth on that train, and I'm telling the truth now. You work for NAPTIP? Barrister Okonkwo made air quotes mockingly. A woman with no education beyond secondary school, who was working as a laundrywoman 3 months ago, suddenly has a government job. Isn't that suspicious? Isn't that NAPTIP buying your testimony? Objection! Barrister Adeyemi was on her feet again. This is harassment! But Nneka didn't wait for the judge to rule. Something inside her snapped. You think poor people can't tell the truth? Her voice was stronger now, anger burning through the stammer. You think, but because I washed clothes for a living, I'm too stupid to know what I saw? I saw your client sell a child. I saw him count money for a human life, and nothing you say, no matter how expensive your suit is, no matter how many degrees you have, can change what I saw. The courtroom erupted again. People cheered. Justice Nwankwo banged her gavel, but didn't seem particularly motivated to stop the applause quickly. Barrister Okonkwo, flustered and angry, tried one more attack. Ms. Okafor, my client is a respected government official, a family man, a philanthropist. Why should this court believe a stammering laundrywoman over him? The courtroom went silent, shocked by the naked classism and ableism in the question. Nneka looked at him calmly, and when she spoke, her voice didn't stammer at all. Because I'm telling the truth, and the truth doesn't care about your clothes, your connections, or how smoothly you speak. The truth is the truth, and your client is guilty. This time, the applause was deafening. Justice Nwankwo let it continue for a full minute before restoring order. Barrister Okonkwo had no further questions. The trial continued for 2 more weeks. The prosecution presented evidence of Chief Danladi's co-defendants, the security guard, the recruiters, the safe house operators, the corrupt police officers who had taken bribes to look the other way. One particularly devastating piece of evidence was a ledger seized during the raids, written in Chief Danladi's own handwriting, listing 43 names with ages, village origins, and amounts paid. Beside each name was a status: sold, transported, or in 3 horrifying cases, disposed. Those 3 girls were never found, presumed dead. The defense tried everything: character witnesses who swore Chief Danladi was a good man, technical objections about evidence collection, attempts to delay proceedings, even a bizarre argument that the girls had consented to being transported for work opportunities. But the evidence was overwhelming. The testimonies were consistent, and Nneka's eyewitness account, combined with the recorded phone calls, left no room for doubt. On the final day of the trial, both sides gave closing arguments. Barrister Adeyemi spoke for nearly an hour, methodically walking through every piece of evidence, every testimony, every financial record. She ended powerfully. Your Honor, this case is about more than one man's crimes. It's about whether Nigeria will protect its most vulnerable citizens, poor girls from villages who have no voice, no power, no protection. The defendant believed he was untouchable. He believed his political connections, his wealth, his status would shield him from justice. And he would have been right, except for one woman. A woman he dismissed as a stammering fool, a woman he slapped and mocked, a woman who had every reason to stay silent but chose courage instead. Nneka Okafor is not the victim here. Those 43 girls are the victims. But Nneka is the hero, and this court has the opportunity to prove that in Nigeria, heroes are rewarded and monsters are punished. We ask for the maximum sentence on all counts. Barrister Okonkwo's closing argument was weaker, relying heavily on attacking Nneka's credibility and suggesting the case was politically motivated. But even he seemed to know it was hopeless. Justice Nwankwo adjourned to deliberate. 2 days later, she delivered her verdict. The courtroom was even more packed than before. News helicopters circled overhead. The street outside was flooded with protesters, supporters, and curious onlookers. Nneka sat in the front row, holding Hawa's hand on one side and Mrs. Okonkwo's hand on the other. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Justice Nwankwo entered, and everyone rose. When she took her seat, she looked directly at Chief Danladi. "Will the defendant please rise?" Chief Danladi stood, his face pale, his hands cuffed. Justice Nwankwo opened a thick folder and began to read. "This court has reviewed all evidence presented, all testimonies heard, and all arguments made. The evidence against the defendant is overwhelming, consistent, and credible. The testimonies of the rescued girls are heartbreaking but clear. The financial records are damning. The recorded phone calls leave no doubt about the defendant's knowledge and participation in these crimes." She paused, her face hard. The defense's attempts to discredit the primary witness, Ms. Nneka Okafor, by attacking her speech impediment and her socioeconomic status, were not only unsuccessful, but deeply offensive to this court. Ms. Okafor demonstrated more courage and integrity in one moment of truth-telling than the defendant has shown in his entire privileged life. Chief Danladi's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. On the charge of human trafficking of minors, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit human trafficking, guilty. On the charge of assault, guilty. On the charge of corruption, guilty. On all 17 counts, guilty. The courtroom exploded. People cheered, cried, hugged each other. Outside, the crowd erupted in celebration. Justice Nwankwo banged her gavel until order was restored. Sentencing will be as follows. For human trafficking of minors, the maximum penalty, 25 years imprisonment without possibility of parole. For conspiracy, an additional 15 years. For assault, 2 years. For corruption, 10 years. These sentences will run consecutively, not concurrently. In total, Chief Danladi Musa, you are sentenced to 52 years in federal prison. Chief Danladi's legs buckled. He grabbed the table for support. Furthermore, Justice Nwankwo continued, all your assets are to be seized and liquidated. The proceeds will go into a victims' compensation fund to support the rescued girls' education, medical care, and rehabilitation. Your political honors and titles are hereby permanently revoked. And this court recommends that your co-defendants receive similarly severe sentences. She looked directly at Nneka. Ms. Okafor, this court wishes to formally recognize your extraordinary courage. You are a credit to your country. Thank you for reminding us all that justice requires ordinary people to do extraordinary things. And then, Justice Nwankwo did something unprecedented. She stood and began to clap. The entire courtroom rose as one, applauding. Lawyers, journalists, officers, victims, citizens, everyone on their feet, applauding the stammering widow who had brought down a monster. Nneka sat there, tears streaming down her face, unable to process what was happening. 52 years. He would die in prison. He would never hurt another girl again. Hawa hugged her tightly. You saved me. You saved all of us. As Chief Danladi was led away in handcuffs, screaming about appeals and injustice, Nneka felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness exactly. The pain of those 43 girls would never disappear. 3 were dead, and nothing would bring them back. But justice had been served, the truth had been heard, and one woman's voice, stammering but unbreakable, had changed everything. Justice served. But Nneka's story doesn't end here. Coming chapter will show you what happens when a hero becomes a movement. What should Nneka do next? Like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. The final chapter will inspire you like nothing else. Six months after the trial, Nneka stood on the stage of the Echo Convention Center in Lagos, facing an audience of 3,000 women. The banner behind her read, Speak Up, Nigeria, National Women's Empowerment Summit. She wore a beautiful green Ankara gown designed by one of Nigeria's top fashion designers, donated specifically for this event. Her hair was styled in elegant braids, woven with gold thread. But what made her truly shine wasn't the clothing or the makeup. It was the confidence in her eyes, the strength in her posture, the absolute certainty that she belonged on that stage. 6 months ago, she had been terrified to speak in front of a dozen people on a train. Now, she was addressing thousands, with millions more watching the live broadcast across Nigeria and beyond. Good afternoon, Nneka began, and her voice, though it still carried traces of her stammer, was clear and strong. My name is Nneka Okafor, and I am a survivor. I am a witness. I am a mother, and I am living proof that your voice, no matter how it sounds, has the power to change the world. The audience erupted in applause. Women of all ages, from teenagers to grandmothers, were on their feet cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes. Nneka waited for the noise to settle, then continued. 6 months ago, I was running away, running from poverty, from tea trauma, from a past I thought would define me forever. I believed I was nobody, a stammering widow with no power, no voice, no future. I was wrong. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces, women who had traveled from every corner of Nigeria to attend this summit, women who saw themselves in her story, women who were finding their own courage through her example. The day I spoke up on that train, I wasn't brave. I was terrified. My hands shook, my voice broke. I thought Chief Danladi would kill me, but I spoke anyway, and that moment taught me something. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is speaking even when your voice shakes. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind Nneka could never have imagined. After the trial, she had become a national celebrity, not the shallow kind that fades after a news cycle, but the meaningful kind that actually changes lives. Her face was on murals in Lagos, Abuja, and Kano. Schools invited her to speak to students about courage and integrity. Universities offered her honorary degrees. The president of Nigeria had invited her to the State House for a formal commendation. But more importantly, her story had sparked a movement. Nneka's law had passed through the Senate and House of Representatives with overwhelming support, the first time in years that politicians from all parties agreed on something. The law established mandatory minimum sentences for human traffickers, created a national whistleblower protection program, and tripled NAPTIP's funding. In the 6 months since Chief Danladi's arrest, NAPTIP had rescued 127 trafficking victims across Nigeria. 17 additional trafficking rings had been dismantled. 43 people connected to the trade had been arrested and prosecuted, and it all traced back to one woman who refused to stay silent. Mrs. Okonkwo, sitting in the front row of the convention center, smiled with pride as she watched Nneka command the stage. The stammering, frightened woman she had met on the train had transformed into a powerful advocate, a voice for the voiceless, a symbol of hope for millions. But Mrs. Okonkwo knew the truth that the public didn't see. Nneka still struggled, still had nightmares about that compound in Kano, still woke up some mornings paralyzed by anxiety, convinced that somehow Chief Danladi would escape prison and come for her. The difference was that now Nneka had support. Therapy had helped her process the trauma. Speech therapy had given her tools to manage her stammer when it intensified during stressful moments. And most importantly, she had a community, other survivors, NAPTIP colleagues, and the millions of Nigerian women who had embraced her as one of their own. Today, I want to tell you about someone special, Nneka continued, gesturing to the side of the stage. Someone who reminds me every day why speaking up matters. Please will welcome Hawa Ibrahim. The audience erupted again as Hawa walked onto the stage. She was taller now, healthier, wearing a beautiful traditional Hausa outfit and a confident smile that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. Hawa took the microphone, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and strong, the voice of a girl who had survived hell and chosen to live. My name is Hawa Ibrahim. I am 14 years old. 6 months ago, I was in a room with rope burns on my wrists, waiting to be sold to a stranger. Today, I am here because one woman saw me, remembered me, and refused to look away. She turned to Nneka, tears in her eyes. Auntie Nneka, you saved my life, but you did more than that. You taught me that being a victim doesn't mean staying a victim. You showed me that survival is not enough. We must live. We must speak. We must fight for others the way you fought for me. Hawa faced the audience again. I am now in school, in JSS 2. I want to become a lawyer so I can help other girls like me. And I want everyone watching to know, if you are being hurt, if you are being held against your will, if you are suffering in silence, speak up. Tell someone. Your voice matters. Your life matters. You matter. The applause was deafening. Women were openly crying, hugging each other, holding up signs that read, "We are Nneka. We are Hawa. Our voices will be heard." After Hawa left the stage, Nneka introduced several other speakers, women who had left abusive marriages, girls who had escaped trafficking, activists who had fought for justice, lawyers who had prosecuted gender-based violence cases. Each woman had a story. Each woman had found her voice, and each woman credited Nneka's example as the spark that gave her courage. But the most powerful moment came when Nneka invited 3 women onto the stage who had been on the train that day, the day Chief Danladi slapped her. The first was the elderly woman, Mama Ejiro, who had offered Neka pain medicine and witnessed the assault. "I will never forgive myself for not doing more that day," Mama Ejiro said, her voice heavy with regret. "I saw him hit her. I saw the blood. And yes, I spoke up a little, but not enough. I was afraid, and my fear almost cost lives." She turned to the audience. "Don't be like I was. When you see injustice, speak loudly, act boldly. Your silence is permission for evil to continue." The second woman was younger, a university student who had been on the train. "I recorded the assault on my phone," she admitted, "but I was too scared to post it. I thought, he's too powerful. Nothing will happen to him anyway. I almost deleted the video, but then Neka stood up and spoke, and I realized if she could be brave, so could I. So I sent the video to NapTip, to journalists, to everyone who would listen, and that video helped convict him." The third was a middle-aged trader who had watched everything in silence. "I am ashamed," she said simply. "I watched that man abuse Neka, and I did nothing. I told myself it wasn't my business, that getting involved would only bring trouble to my family. And technically, I was right. When I finally testified at the trial, some people in my community called me a troublemaker, but you know what? I can live with being called a troublemaker. I couldn't live with being a coward." These testimonies hit harder than any prepared speech could. These were ordinary women admitting their failures, their fears, their complicity through silence, and choosing to do better. During the lunch break, Neka sat in a private room with Mrs. Okonkwo, Hawa, and several other NapTip staff members, eating jollof rice and drinking fresh juice. "You're doing incredibly well," Mrs. Okonkwo said. "I know this is exhausting." Neka smiled tiredly. "It is, but it's also healing. Every time I tell the story, it feels less like something that happened to me and more like something I chose to overcome." "That's growth," Mrs. Okonkwo replied. "That's transformation." A young NapTip officer knocked on the door. "Ma, sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here who insists on seeing Neka. She says it's urgent." "Who?" Mrs. Okonkwo asked, immediately alert. "She says her name is Blessing, and she traveled from Kano specifically to find Neka." Neka's eyes widened. "Blessing? I don't know any—" Then she stopped. "Wait, there was a Blessing at the compound. She worked in the main house. Is it her?" "Let her in," Mrs. Okonkwo instructed. A young woman in her 20s entered the room, wearing a simple dress and carrying a small bag. She looked nervous, almost frightened, but also determined. "Neka?" she asked hesitantly. "Yes?" "You don't remember me, but I remember you. I worked as a house girl for Hajia Ramatu. You did laundry there every Tuesday and Friday." Neka nodded slowly, the memory returning. Yes, I remember. You used to help me carry water sometimes." "I saw you that night," Blessing said, her voice shaking. "The night you witnessed what Chief Danladi did in the boys' quarters. I saw you looking through the window. I saw your face, the fear, the horror, and I knew you had seen something terrible." Everyone in the room was silent, listening intently. "I didn't say anything to anyone," Blessing continued, "but after you left Kano, after Chief Danladi was arrested, after the trial, I couldn't stop thinking about you, about how you had the courage to speak when I stayed silent. Because Neka, I knew. I had known for months what was happening in that compound. I had seen girls come and go. I had heard them crying. And I did nothing." Tears streamed down Blessing's face. "I told myself it wasn't my problem, that if I spoke up, I would lose my job, or worse. So I cleaned the floors and cooked the meals and pretended I didn't see anything. And because of my silence, girls suffered." She pulled something from her bag, a notebook, worn and stained. "After the raids, after Alhaji Mahmoud was arrested, I went into the boys' quarters while the compound was empty. And I found this. It's a notebook where the security guard kept records, names, ages, villages, dates. More detailed than the ledger Chief Dunlody kept. There are names in here that weren't in the police reports. Girls who might still be out there, suffering. Mrs. Okonkwo took the notebook carefully, flipping through pages filled with cramped handwriting. Her expression grew darker with each page. "Why didn't you give this to the police?" she asked. Not accusingly, just curious. "Because I'm a coward," Blessing said simply. "I was afraid if I came forward, people would ask why I didn't speak sooner. They would blame me for the girls who weren't saved. But then I watched your speech at the trial, Neka, and I realized silence is still a choice. And I'm choosing differently now. I'm choosing to speak, even if it's late, even if people judge me." Neka stood and walked over to Blessing, pulling her into a tight embrace. "You spoke today," Neka whispered. "That's what matters. Not when you spoke, but that you did. Thank you." Mrs. Okonkwo was already on her phone, calling her team. "We're going to investigate every name in this notebook. Blessing, would you be willing to give a full statement?" "Yes," Blessing said, "and I'll testify if you need me to. I'm done being silent." The afternoon session of the summit focused on practical solutions, how to identify trafficking situations, how to report abuse safely, what legal protections existed for whistleblowers, how to support survivors. But the most impactful segment was when Neka opened the floor for women in the audience to share their own stories. One by one, women stood up. A teacher from Enugu talked about escaping a violent husband after 20 years of marriage. A student from Kaduna described reporting her uncle for molesting her, and how Neka's story gave her the courage to break the family's silence. A market trader from Onitsha explained how she had witnessed child abuse in her neighborhood, and finally reported it to social services after hearing about Neka's case. A police officer from Abuja admitted that she had previously dismissed domestic violence reports as family matters, but after seeing Neka's courage, she had started taking every report seriously and had helped 3 women escape abusive situations. Each testimony built on the last, creating a tapestry of voices that had been silent for too long. As the summit drew to a close, Neka stood at the podium one final time, looking out at the thousands of women who had gathered, at the cameras broadcasting to millions more, at the movement she had accidentally started simply by choosing truth over fear. "When I boarded that train in Kano 6 months ago," she said, "I thought I was running away. But I wasn't running away. I was running toward this moment, toward all of you, toward an end Nigeria where women's voices matter, where powerful men face consequences, where speaking up is celebrated, not punished." She paused, her voice growing stronger. "Chief Danladi Musa is in Poir prison, where he will die. His trafficking network is destroyed. 40 girls have been rescued. Neka's law will protect countless more, but none of that matters if we go back to silence. If we see injustice and look away, if we hear a woman crying and close our doors." Neka looked directly into the camera, speaking to every person watching across Nigeria and beyond. "I am not special. I am not a hero. I am just a woman who decided that speaking up, even with a stammer, even with fear, even with nothing to my name, was better than staying silent. And if I can do it, so can you." She raised her fist in the air, and 3,000 women rose to their feet, raising their fists with her. "We will not be silent," Neka shouted, her voice echoing through the convention center. "We will not be silent," 3,000 voices roared back. "We will speak. We will speak. We will fight. We will fight. We will win. We will win." That evening, after the summit ended, after the crowds dispersed, after the cameras stopped rolling, Neka sat quietly in her modest apartment in Yaba with Zainab asleep in her lap. Her phone buzzed with messages, congratulations from colleagues, thank yous from survivors, interview requests from international media. But she ignored them all for now. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a cramped flat in Kano where she washed clothes for wealthy families, to a train where a powerful man tried to break her, to a courtroom where she helped send that man to prison for life, to a stage where she inspired thousands. But what she thought about most was the notebook Blessing had brought. The names of girls who might still be suffering, who might still be waiting for someone to see them, to remember them, to speak for them. Tomorrow, she would work with Mrs. Okonkwo to investigate every name in that notebook. She would continue her work at NAPTIP, helping rescued girls rebuild their lives. She would give speeches, grant interviews, and use her platform to keep fighting. But tonight, she just held her daughter and whispered the same words she had spoken on that terrifying night in Kano when she had decided to leave. "We made it, my love. We're safe, we're free, and we're never going back." Zainab stirred in her sleep, and Nneka smiled. This little girl would grow up in a different Nigeria than the one Nneka had known. Not a perfect Nigeria. There was still so much work to do, so many battles to fight. But a Nigeria where women's voices mattered a little more, where traffickers faced real consequences, where one stammering widow's courage had sparked a movement that would outlive them all. 2 years later, the Speak Up Nigeria movement had chapters in all 36 states. Nneka had been appointed as a special advisor to the Minister of Women Affairs. She had published a memoir titled The Voice That Shook, which became a bestseller and was being adapted into a film. But more importantly, she had helped rescue 247 more trafficking victims through her continued work with NAPTIP. Hawa, now 16, had become a youth advocate, traveling to schools across northern Nigeria, teaching young girls how to recognize trafficking recruitment tactics. Chief Danladi Musa died in Kuje prison of a heart attack 18 months into his sentence. Few people mourned him. Blessing, the house girl who had finally found her courage, now worked as a NAPTIP field officer, using her knowledge of how trafficking operations worked to identify and dismantle new networks. And Nneka's stammer? It never completely went away, but she stopped seeing it as a weakness. It was just part of her voice, the voice that had changed Nigeria. On the second anniversary of that historic train journey, a statue was unveiled at Lagos Terminus Station. It showed a woman holding a child, her mouth open as if speaking, her posture strong and defiant. The plaque read, "Nneka Okafor, the voice that wouldn't be silenced." Courage is not the absence of fear. It is speaking even when your voice shakes. Nneka stood before the statue with Zainab, now 6 years old, holding her hand. "Mommy, is that you?" Zainab asked, pointing at the bronze figure. "Yes, my love. Were you scared when you spoke up?" Nneka knelt down to look her daughter in the eyes. "I was terrified, but I spoke anyway. And that made all the difference." "Will I be brave like you when I grow up?" Nneka smiled, pulling her daughter close. "You already are, my love. You already are." The end. Final message. Nneka's story began on a train from Kano to Lagos, but her impact will echo for generations. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. If you or someone you know is experiencing trafficking, abuse, or violence, reach out to NAPTIP or local authorities. Your voice matters. Your life matters. You matter. Thank you for watching. Stories by Tino. Please like, subscribe, and share this story. Comment below telling us where you're watching from and what Nneka's journey means to you. Remember, courage is not the absence of fear. It is speaking even when your voice shakes. Stay strong, stay brave, stay unbreakable.